Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel, Deck Tech for Decks. Today I've got an exciting one for you because this is my current favorite commander deck. But before we get started, all I ask is that if you enjoy the video, please like and consider subscribing. Alright, now let's get into it. During each of your turns, you may play up to one permanent card of each permanent type from your graveyard. Notably, that's artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, creatures, and lands. This ability is easily abusable, and the fact that we're only able to do one of those permanents per turn is not going to be a limiting factor due to the way we built this deck. But what makes this commander deck unique is that it's got a secret commander, the Scarab God. I always loved the Scarab God, but I really thought it was always missing green, just because of the fact that I want to untap all of my lands using cards like Seedborn Muse to play this ability on my opponent's turn and basically take a turn on their turn. And doing that is going to create a massive board state of zombies. Additionally, we've just put some bombs in the deck that are just massive creatures that can win us the game as soon as they enter the battlefield. So if that sounds like a deck you're interested in, stick around and let's get into it. First of all, we want to make sure we get the Scarab God every game. So let's include some tutors like Gravebreaker Lamia. Not only is this going to lower the cost of the cards that we cast from our graveyard, but it's also going to throw the Scarab God in there, so it's perfect. Corpse Connoisseur, if we mill into this guy, we can unearth him or just cast him from our hand, sacrifice him later, and get another tutor off of him. That's what's really good about the tutors, is after we use them to get the Scarab God, we can just use them to tutor for our other creatures we want to bring out, such as those bombs, you know? Auric Lore Mage. This guy is repeatable. You just tap him and go ahead and throw something in your graveyard. He's really good. Fauna Shaman, a staple for this deck. It's going to get us the Scarab God and many more creatures. If they don't deal with her fast, we're going to win fast. As I said earlier, we're going to be untapping those lands using Seedborn Muse, Billadros Witherbloom, and Sword of Feast and Famine. I know 3 cards pretty underwhelming, but 2 of them we're going to be able to get pretty easily because they're creatures, and we are running a decent amount of tutors in this deck. Alright, I've made you wait long enough. Let's look at those creatures we're wanting to recur with that ability. We have Yorick the Desecrated. We have a lot of ETB effects in our deck, so the value we're going to create with this guy is going to end the game pretty quickly. Jin-Gitaxias Progress Tyrant. He's the nicer of the 2, but also really good in this deck, because not only is he going to double up on all the creatures we cast, again I mentioned those ETBs, which we will get into later, but he's also going to slow our opponents down a lot by countering the first spell they try to cast each turn. Old Gnawbone. We are going to be creating a lot of creatures in the deck. Some of them are going to be 4/4s, some of them are going to be bigger. Regardless, whenever we deal combat damage, we're going to create a massive amount of treasure tokens, and that's just going to allow us to use our commander's ability that much more. Again, I'm talking about the Scarab God here. Archfiend of Despair. Who doesn't love this guy? At the beginning of our upkeep, the Scarab God is going to hit people for a bunch of damage, and then we're going to go ahead and double that with Archfiend of Despair. Nyxbloom Ancient. This one's crazy. It's just going to triple your mana, and it has trample, so what's not to like about that? Toxrill the Corrosive. Believe me when I say, if this guy lasts a rotation around the board, you will win the game. It's going to wipe out their board and give you a massive board, and then you can get card advantage off of that. This guy is amazing. The Mimeoplasm. I love this guy, and he's going to be really good in this deck, because not only is he going to be able to copy any of our opponent's creatures, but also our creatures, and I just named off some pretty good creatures we'd like to copy with this guy. Coma Cosmos Serpent. This guy enters the battlefield, and we'll be able to control the board. We're going to be creating a massive board of serpents, and while doing that, we'll be able to give him indestructible or counter those activated abilities. So what's not to like about that? Finally, we have Lord of the Forsaken. We're going to be casting a lot of cards from the graveyard, so being able to pay life to do that is pretty game-breaking in this scenario. Now guys, I don't have to tell you, we're going to want a lot of cards in our graveyard, so let's mill those cards. We have World Shaper. This guy's amazing. On top of filling our graveyard, he's going to ramp us a lot when he finally dies. Greater Good. This card overperforms in this deck because even if you sacrifice a 3/3, drawing 3 cards to discard 3 cards, that's basically just drawing 3 cards in this deck. Taigam Sidisi's Hand. This is really good because it's going to allow you to have some massive card selection. And as I said earlier with Greater Good, you're just going to be basically drawing those 3 cards because you're going to be pitching them to the graveyard and you'll be able to cast them later. Under Realm Lich, same thing as Taigam. You're just going to be drawing 3 cards, and additionally, you can give this guy Indestructible. Mesmeric Orb. This card is one of those cards you don't really realize how insane it is till you play with it, and you're like, oh, okay, everybody's just going to fill their graveyards. And additionally, if you get Seedborn Muse on the battlefield with this, you're going to untap with like 20 zombies because you'll have the targets. Mind Crank. This is another one that's just going to fill the graveyards. Like, it gets aggressive, and that's how we want it. At the beginning of our upkeep, Scarab God's going to trigger. They're going to take some damage and immediately mill some cards, and we'll immediately have some targets to bring back from the graveyard. Forgotten Creation. This guy's amazing because you can just pitch your whole hand and draw another hand. It's basically like wheeling, but you get to keep the cards because your commander's Muldrotha. Who cares if the shit's in the graveyard? Jace's Archivist. This one's even better because it targets your opponents as well. We want their graveyards full also because we want targets for the Scarab God. Alright guys, let's look at that card draw. And remember, pay attention to those ETBs. We have Elemental Bond. Every time we bring a 4/4 zombie onto the battlefield, we're going to draw a card with this guy. Additionally, we just have some cards that are over 3 power. Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. This card's amazing in Muldrotha because you can just cast this card and not care that he sacrifices himself. In fact, you prefer it because for 3 mana, not only are you going to get to draw a card, ramp a little bit, and gain 3 life, but he throws himself back into the graveyard so you can do it all again next turn. Coiling Oracle. This is basically going to draw you a card or ramp you a card. Either way, you're going to be happy with that outcome. Baleful Strix. This one's just going to draw you a card and has got Death Touch, so you'll be able to take someone out with it, hopefully. The Gitrog Monster. This guy's kind of janky in other decks, but fits perfectly in Muldrotha, because you just sacrifice the land, and then you can cast the land right back from your graveyard. And additionally, every time you mill a land, you're going to draw the card off of that. Secrets of the Dead. This card is amazing in the deck, and I can't stress that enough. Because all of our permanents in the deck are pretty cheap unless they're the bombs, right? It's pretty common in the deck to cast an artifact, an enchantment, and a creature all on one turn, almost every turn. So if this is just going to draw us 3 cards almost every turn, I'm into that. Mystic Remora. This card's pretty insane because you don't really care that you have a cumulative upkeep. You can just let it die and then cast it again. And every time someone plays one of those non-creature spells, you're going to draw a card. That's going to be pretty crazy. Unbridled Growth. This one's pretty simple. 1 mana, draw a card. Alright guys, let's get into removal. And the removal in this deck is not exactly nice, and it's actually kind of interesting. We've got Canoptic Tomb Sentinel. This card's going to be amazing because it's just going to get rid of, or it's going to exile a target permanent, which is crazy. I mean, not land, but it's still, the utility is there. Glen Elendra Archmage. We don't care that it dies and goes to the graveyard because we're just going to be able to bring it back once with that persist trigger and then cast it again. And we're basically just going to be able to take control of the board from there. Bane of Progress. This one's really good for those pesky treasure players because white, I'm sorry you had ramp, but now that this guy's in my graveyard, you can say goodbye to it. Oko, Thief of Crowns. This guy's messed up, right? Because if he dies, you can just bring him back, so it's like an Oko that you can't get rid of. And that's not right, but we're definitely gonna do that. Massacre Worm. This one's really good because one of the ways to beat this deck is to outgo white it, you know, just a huge token strategy, and Massacre Worm's going to make sure that doesn't happen. Seal of Primordium. This one's just really efficient removal. Reclamation Sage, again, really efficient removal. Imprisoned in the Moon. This one's one of those messed up ones, right? Because we can do this to someone's commander and basically turn off their deck. Deep Freeze, same thing. We're going to be turning someone's deck off. Binding of the Old Gods. This one's really good because as soon as it gets to that 3rd chapter, it goes to our graveyard and we can cast it again. So we can basically just have this on repeat. Pernicious Deeds. This one's a board wipe, and yes, it'll get rid of our board too, but we don't really care. In the scenario where we need the board wipe, we're probably not ahead. Alright, let's take a look at those cards that didn't really fit into a category. We've got Parallel Lives. This one's insane because every time we use the Scarab God's ability, we're going to be doubling up on those tokens. That's going to be pretty crazy. But what if they're legendary? Well, then we'll run Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. This is going to do work because not only does it copy something when it comes into the battlefield, but it's going to allow us to create a token copy of those legendary creatures. Tormod the Desecrator. This one's pretty good also. This will make you go wide fast. Again, we're casting a ton of permanents from our graveyard, and now we're going to just create a massive board state doing it. Additionally, remember, on our upkeep, the Scarab God is going to ding our opponents for each zombie we control. So that's going to be pretty crazy. Cleaver Scab. This one is insane because we're just going to create a token copy of a zombie, and then we're going to sacrifice that zombie to then create 2 token copies. If you have a doubling season on the battlefield, this just gets out of hand really fast. Biomancer's Familiar. This is usually the second card I tutor for in the deck. It's going to make it to where we only have to spend blue-black for that Scarab God's ability, and that plus Seedborn Muse, you can untap with 20 zombies on your board. Bramble Sovereign. Again, we ran a lot of EDB creatures, so the ability to double up on their ability is pretty good, and also it just gives you another body. Vizier Seer. This one, just really good sack outlet. Marin of Clan Neltoth. I have somewhat of a crush on this lady, and I just shove her in any deck where I can make sense of it. And she's really good in this one because later on in the game, you're going to want to be casting the bombs, and she'll enable you to use the utility creatures such as Reclamation Sage. That way you're not spending mana to do it. Lastly, guys, let's cover that ramp, and I'll get out of your hair. If you guys have enjoyed the video so far, I'd really appreciate a like. Dryad of the Elysian Grove. This one's going to be really efficient because it's going to allow us to use mana as though it was any color. So that Scarab God activation gets extremely easy to use, and it's going to allow us to play an extra land, which is really useful because we usually always have one in our graveyard and always have one in our hand. The Great Hinge. This one's just really efficient because we're going to be casting a lot of creatures in this deck. So the Great Hinge is perfect. Moon Silver Key. This is honestly really efficient because it's going to let us tutor for a mana rock. So getting Great Hinge is going to be really useful. Next up, we have Belby. And the ramp she can produce is insane because on our upkeep, Scarab God's going to trigger, everybody's going to take some damage, and you'll know she'll just add 6 to your mana pool. So that's going to be pretty useful. Secure Tribuilder, this guy's all reliable right here. We then have the Signets, Gilgari's Signet, Dimir Signet, Simic Signet, and Arcane Signet. Your goal is literally just to get your commander on the battlefield, so having the Signets is really efficient. Lastly, we got Soul Ring. Alright guys, that's going to do it for the deck. Let me know what bombs you would include that you want to reanimate with Scarab God. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.